What if I told you that Messi once scored a penalty so controversial, FIFA had to rewrite the rules?
Committing the penalty on the Argentine, and how about this for a penalty kick?
Tonight, I'm showing you 6 moments where La Liga legends didn't just break records, they broke football itself. And one of these changes still affects every single match you watch today. Over the next 20 minutes, I'll show you the moments so controversial, so unforgettable, that football itself had to adapt. It was February 2016, Camp Nou, Barcelona versus Celta Vigo. The score was already 3-1, and the 90,000 fans in the stadium expected a routine finish. Lionel Messi had just won a penalty, and whenever Messi places the ball on the spot, there is never any doubt. Everyone braced for the obvious. The world's best player takes one step forward, one swing of the left foot, and the ball hits the net. Another goal for the highlight reel. But this time, it wasn't obvious at all. Messi ran up, leaned over the ball as if to strike, and then, with the calmest touch you'll ever see, he simply rolled it a couple of feet sideways. Luis Suarez, alert and already sprinting forward, smashed it first time past a helpless Sergio Alvarez in goal. For a moment, the Camp Nou erupted into confusion before it exploded into celebration. Some fans thought Messi had miskicked, others thought it was illegal. Defenders screamed at the referee, arms raised, convinced they had just witnessed a crime against football. And yet, the referee pointed to the centre circle. The goal stood. On the surface, it was a clever trick, but beneath it, the moment tore open one of football's oldest questions. Where does genius end and disrespect begin? For older fans, it wasn't new. Johan Cruyff and Jesper Olsen had done the exact same thing for Ajax in 1982, and Messi later admitted it was a tribute to Cruyff. But this was no Dutch Eredivisie match. This was Barcelona, at the height of their powers, under the brightest lights in La Liga. And in that moment, the football world split in two. Commentators on live TV couldn't believe it either. Was Messi showing Celta Vigo respect by not shooting himself, or humiliating them by turning a penalty into a playground move? Legally, the referee was right to allow it. Messi had followed the letter of the law, but within days, the International Football Association Board and La Liga's refereeing body clarified what had just happened and what needed to change. The ball, they emphasised, must move clearly forward. The assisting player, in this case Suarez, cannot encroach too early into the box, which he had done in that case. So from then on, referees were told to watch carefully for timing, encroachment, and intent in any trick penalties from then on. Messi and Suarez hadn't just scored a goal, they'd forced the rule makers to tighten the laws. They had pushed football into the grey area between creativity and chaos, and lawmakers had to step in. But that was Messi in a nutshell. Even when he wasn't scoring solo goals, he was rewriting how the game had to be played. But here's the thing, not every La Liga rule change came from genius. Some came from something much darker. Because years earlier, another Brazilian star had made referees and lawmakers rethink football. Not with magic, but with his acting. And his name was Rivaldo. La Liga in the late 1990s was pure theatre. Zidane pulling strings at Madrid, Raúl scoring for fun, Figo dazzling crowds, Ronaldo bulldozing defences, and in Barcelona, there was Rivaldo, the Brazilian who could conjure goals out of nothing. His left foot was a weapon. His balance, his elegance, his unpredictability, everything about him screamed brilliance. Think back to Istanbul in 2001, when he scored one of the greatest bicycle kicks football has ever seen, from outside the box, in the dying seconds of a Champions League tie. That was Rivaldo in his purest form, breathtaking, audacious, impossible. But there was another Rivaldo, the one who drove defenders and referees insane, the one who turned small nudges into Oscar-worthy performances. A hand brushed his shoulder, down he went like he'd been struck by lightning. A late footstep clipped his heel. He was suddenly rolling across the turf, clutching a shin no one had touched. And while La Liga fans were used to a bit of gamesmanship, Rivaldo perfected it. Simulation wasn't his side trick, it became part of his identity. But his infamous moment came not in La Liga, but on the world stage at the 2002 World Cup. Against Turkey, Rivaldo clutched his face after being struck in the thigh by a ball. A piece of simulation so blatant, FIFA handed him a fine. But in Spain, this wasn't unusual. He wasn't alone. Other forwards, including Dani Alves later, perfected the dark art of drawing fouls by exaggerating contact. And fans noticed, the media noticed. The credibility of referees began to erode. How do you officiate a game when world-class stars are collapsing at the faintest touch? That's when La Liga's disciplinary committees took a step no other league was taking at the time. Long before VAR existed, they began reviewing games on video after the final whistle. If a player was caught diving or simulating contact, they could be suspended even if the referee hadn't punished them on the pitch. It was a direct response to a culture that Rivaldo symbolized. The artistry of his left foot was unforgettable, but so too was the frustration he inspired in defenders and referees. Simulation became part of La Liga's global identity, for better or worse, but it also accelerated the push toward technology, video review, and eventually VAR itself. Rivaldo never set out to change football's laws, yet in trying to trick referees, he forced them to evolve. But if Rivaldo and others changed how referees dealt with players falling too easily, this next La Liga star forced them to rethink how goalkeepers play football entirely. And for that, we need to talk about Santiago Cañizares. The early 2000s were Valencia's golden years. They weren't just a team, they were a force. 2 straight Champions League finals, a La Liga title in 2002, snatched away from Real Madrid and Barcelona, and at the back of it all was a blonde, fiery goalkeeper, Santiago Cañizares. Cañizares wasn't just good, he was commanding, acrobatic, and unafraid to rip into teammates if they switched off. At the Mestalla, he was a cult hero. To opponents, though, he was something else entirely, the man who made the clock his greatest weapon. Here's the thing about Cañizares. Once he caught the ball, football almost stopped. He'd bounce it, adjust his gloves, walk to the very edge of the box, glare at his defenders as if daring them to move, another deep breath. Then maybe, just maybe, he'd roll it back into play. It wasn't 6 seconds, it wasn't even close. Sometimes 10, sometimes 12, sometimes a full 15 before the ball left his hands. And yes, FIFA already had a rule. Goalkeepers were only allowed to hold the ball for 6 seconds. But in reality, it was one of those soft rules that referees almost never enforced. A wink, a warning, maybe a shout to hurry up. Nothing serious. Until Cañizares came along. The way Valencia won games was tight. 1-0 at the Mestalla became their trademark, and that was when Cañizares' antics came alive. Opponents hated it. Entire minutes seemed to evaporate when he was in possession. Rival fans booed so loudly the noise felt like it could shake the stands. Coaches fumed on the touchline, and referees, they started to look embarrassed. Because it was blatant, everyone could see it, yet the officials kept letting him get away with it. Something had to give. Eventually, La Liga had had enough. Referees were ordered to clamp down. The 6-second rule, long ignored, suddenly had teeth. First, verbal warnings, then the yellow cards, and finally, the unthinkable, awarding indirect free kicks inside the box if a goalkeeper delays too long. Cañizares had become the case study. His name came up in refereeing workshops as the prime example of what happens when the soft rules aren't enforced. La Liga was done being mocked for letting time vanish into thin air. Of course, he wasn't the only guilty party. Goalkeepers across the world were stretching those 6 seconds. But Cañizares had pushed it to such extremes in such high-profile matches that referees had no choice but to make an example of him. But while Santiago Cañizares forced officials to rethink how much time goalkeepers could waste, another La Liga star was busy testing something even more sacred than time, the very definition of fair play itself. For him, every goal wasn't just a number on the scoreboard, it was theatre. The leap, the scream, the flex of his arms, the perfectly sculpted torso revealed under the floodlights. His celebrations weren't spontaneous, they were statements. And that was exactly the problem. Throughout his prime years at Real Madrid, Ronaldo's trademark celebrations almost always ended the same way. Shirt off, muscles flexed, body sculpted for the photographers. It happened in El Clásicos, it happened in Champions League knockouts, and of course, it happened in that famous 2014 Champions League final when he scored the penalty to seal La Decima. Did the goal matter in terms of the scoreline? Maybe, but the celebration certainly meant more. Ronaldo tore off his jersey, muscles glistening, holding the pose for photographers who instantly turned it into one of the most iconic and memed images in football history. But here's the catch. FIFA's laws had already made it clear that removing your shirt during a goal celebration is an automatic yellow card. The reason was that the governing bodies wanted to avoid long delays, mass pile-ons, and overly provocative celebrations that could trigger chaos in the stands. Before Ronaldo, the shirt-off rule lived in a grey area. Referees applied it inconsistently, some let it slide, some booked players only in the most provocative situations. Then came Cristiano. He wasn't doing it once in a blue moon, he was doing it everywhere, week after week. Goals against Barcelona, goals in the Champions League, goals in routine league games. For Ronaldo, the shirtless celebration became part of his brand. Suddenly, referees were faced with a dilemma. Let him off and be accused of favouritism, or book him and risk being labelled a killjoy in one of the world's most watched leagues. Spanish talk shows obsessed over it. Would Ronaldo get booked this weekend? What if he picks up a second yellow and gets sent off for flexing? These weren't just talking points, they were genuine risks. On multiple occasions, Ronaldo put himself one booking away from suspension, simply for showing his abs. Eventually, La Liga had no choice. Refereeing bodies in Spain clarified it in no uncertain terms. Shirt off equals yellow card, always, no exceptions. What had once been a soft rule became one of the most strictly enforced in the game, and Ronaldo's theatrics were the reason. To Ronaldo, it was worth it, a way to brand his goals and stamp his dominance. To referees, it was about reasserting authority and consistency. Thanks to Cristiano, what used to be subjective was now automatic. But while Cristiano Ronaldo forced referees to get serious about goal celebrations, Sergio Ramos forced them to get serious about everything else. Some players are remembered for goals, others for trophies. Sergio Ramos, he's remembered for everything: goals, trophies, and more red cards than any defender in modern football history. At Real Madrid, Ramos wasn't just a captain, he was chaos in boots. He scored in Champions League finals, bullied strikers, and dragged his team through wars. But he also pushed referees and the rulebook to its limits. Ramos holds the all-time La Liga record for red cards, 19. Add in Champions League and Copa del Rey, and the total climbs even higher. That number isn't just a trivia fact, it's a reflection of how he played. Aggressive, confrontational, and completely unafraid to commit tactical fouls that danced on the line between clever and criminal. From late tackles to cynical shirt pulls, from elbows in aerial duels to dissent that earned him cards for arguing, Ramos built a reputation not just as one of the world's best defenders, but also as a walking disciplinary case study. By the end of his career in Spain, Ramos had collected 21 red cards in La Liga, the most in history. Each dismissal told the same story: late tackles, desperate lunges, or the kind of tactical fouls that stopped counterattacks before they even began. If you were breaking away with a chance to win the match, Ramos was the last man you wanted chasing you, because he would stop you, legally or not. But here's the crazy part. Ramos was too good to just be reckless. He knew exactly what he was doing. These were professional fouls, the kind coaches quietly admire but referees hate. And he repeated them so often that Spanish refereeing committees literally used him in training workshops, showing clips of his tackles to new referees and asking, yellow or red, reckless or serious foul play. Ramos became the exam question. But it wasn't just the fouls. Ramos was a master of the dark arts. He argued with referees until they cracked. He bought time for his teammates to recover. He threw in an elbow here, a tug there, and then stared down the official as if daring them to show the card. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But every match with Ramos felt like a psychological war between player and referee. In the end, he left two legacies. One, as a serial winner. World Cup, Euros, multiple Champions Leagues. 2, as the player who forced referees to redraw the line between physical football and reckless endangerment. Sergio Ramos didn't just collect red cards, he collected rule changes. He showed that sometimes, to protect the game, referees have to adapt to the player who bends it furthest. And if Ramos changed the rules through aggression, his Barcelona rival, Ronaldinho, countered with artistry, transforming even free kicks into a trick show that required new definitions. Ronaldinho never just played football, he had the smiles. He turned every match into a theatre, every touch into a trick, every free kick into a magic show. In the mid-2000s, when Barcelona ruled Europe, defenders were terrified of his dribbles and keepers dreaded his shots. But perhaps his most mischievous invention didn't come from a nutmeg or an elastico. It came from standing still, with the ball placed neatly on the grass and a referee's whistle still echoing through the stadium. Football had always carried a simple code about free kicks. If the referee blew the whistle once, you could play quickly, catching the defense off guard before the wall was set. If the referee stepped in, pointed at his whistle, and gave you the signal, it was ceremonial. That meant you had to wait. Everyone thought they understood this unwritten rhythm. Then Ronaldinho arrived. With him, nothing was simple. Sometimes he would wait patiently, as if preparing a trademark curler. Then, just as the goalkeeper turned to shout at his wall, Ronaldinho would stroll up and casually roll the ball into the net. This famous free kick against England is a typical example. Or this one, where he steals the free kick from Roberto Carlos. Other times, he bent down, tugging at his socks, pretending to lace his boots. Defenders relaxed, the wall dropped its guard, and in that split second, he would whip the ball goalwards while nobody was ready. To the crowd, it was hilarious, pure genius, a master bending the rules without breaking them. To opponents, it was maddening. By 2005 and 2006, his antics had become infamous. Against Sevilla, he ambled away from the ball, feigning disinterest, then spun and struck it clean before the wall had even formed. The Camp Nou roared, but on the touchline, opposing managers fumed. How do you defend against someone who treats the laws like suggestions? The referees were caught in the middle. The rules said a free kick could be taken quickly, but there was no clarity on how long you had to wait or how much theatre a player could add. Ronaldinho lived in that grey zone. Was he playing the ball, or was he still pretending? Was the wall set, or were they being baited? Week after week, these questions hung in the air. It wasn't that Ronaldinho was cheating, he was exposing the vagueness of the laws. Soon enough, La Liga's officials had to act. After mounting complaints, they issued clearer instructions. A free kick must either be taken immediately without hesitation or be taken ceremoniously, controlled by the whistle. No more middle ground, no more playful pretending. If a referee signalled for a wait, any attempt to trick defenders before the whistle could now be punished as unsporting behaviour. It was a direct response to Ronaldinho's illusions. The smile on his face had forced referees to finally draw a line. Of course, he never stopped smiling, and fans never stopped adoring him. His magic free kicks became part of his legend, proof that even joy could disrupt the rulebook. Ronaldinho hadn't set out to rewrite the laws, but his gamesmanship made the authorities rewrite how referees managed dead balls. Football's rules weren't written in a vacuum. They were shaped, stretched, and rewritten by the players who dared to push boundaries. From Messi and Suarez's trick penalty to Rivaldo's simulations, from Canizares slowing the game to a crawl, Ronaldo stripping off his shirt for the cameras, Ramos forcing referees to tighten discipline, and Ronaldinho reminding us that even free kicks could be theatre. Each one left fingerprints on the modern game. Sometimes it was genius, sometimes it was gamesmanship, sometimes it was both. But every moment forced football to evolve. And that's the beauty of this sport. It isn't just about goals and trophies. It's about how the biggest personalities bend the game itself, until the rule makers have no choice but to adapt. So the next time you watch a penalty, a time-wasting goalkeeper, or a defender walk the disciplinary tightrope, remember, somewhere in La Liga, a legend probably wrote that rule.